The morning mist clung to the towering pines of the Montana Territory as Jack Sullivan shouldered his double-bit axe and headed deeper into the virgin timber. The year was 1882, and the railroad's hungry demand for lumber had brought men like Jack to these remote mountain valleys, far from civilization and the complications that came with it. At 34, Jack had been working timber for over 15 years, moving from camp to camp as the forests fell to progress. He was a big man, 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and hands like tree roots, but his movements through the forest were surprisingly quiet. The mountains had taught him to listen, and what he heard that crisp September morning made him stop dead in his tracks. A baby's cry, weak and muffled, echoing through the pines. Jack set down his axe and stood perfectly still, straining his ears. The sound came again, definitely human, definitely distressed, and definitely too young to be out here alone. The nearest settlement was Timber Falls, 20 miles down the mountain, and no logging crews were working this high up the valley. Following the sound, Jack pushed through a thicket of young pines, their needles wet with dew soaking through his wool shirt. The crying grew louder as he climbed over a fallen log and emerged into a small clearing, surrounded by ancient Douglas firs. The sound was coming from somewhere near the base of the largest tree, but Jack couldn't see anyone. He called out, his deep voice echoing off the mountainsides. "Hello? Is someone there? Are you hurt?" The crying stopped abruptly, as if startled by his voice. Jack approached the base of the great fir, his eyes scanning the forest floor. That's when he noticed it, a small mound of pine needles that looked deliberately arranged, too neat to be natural. Kneeling beside the mound, Jack began carefully brushing away the needles with hands that were gentle despite their size. What he uncovered made his breath catch in his throat. An infant girl, wrapped in a faded blue blanket, lay hidden beneath the forest debris. She was alive but barely. Her lips had a bluish tinge from the cold mountain air, and her crying was weak with exhaustion. The baby couldn't have been more than a few months old, far too young to survive long in the wilderness. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," Jack whispered, his Irish accent thickening with emotion. He carefully lifted the infant from her hiding place, wrapping his own wool coat around both of them. "What kind of devil would leave a wee one like you out here to die?" The baby's eyes opened briefly, bright blue, unfocused, but somehow seeming to look directly at him. She made a soft mewing sound, like a lost kitten. "There now, little one," Jack said softly, his voice naturally gentle despite its deep timbre. "Uncle Jack's got you now. You're safe." Jack had been around enough newborn calves and foals to recognize the signs of exposure and dehydration. This baby needed warmth, food, and medical attention immediately. But the nearest doctor was in Timber Falls, and that was a full day's hard ride even for a man on horseback. Looking around the clearing, Jack tried to piece together what had happened. There were no tracks visible in the pine needle carpet, no signs of a struggle or camp. Someone had brought this baby here deliberately and hidden her where she might not be found for days, if ever. The thought filled Jack with a cold anger. He'd seen plenty of cruelty in his years. Men trampled by logging accidents, while their bosses worried more about lost time than lost lives. Families turned out of company housing when the breadwinner was injured. But this was different. This was abandoning a helpless child to die alone in the wilderness. Jack settled the baby more securely in his coat and began the trek back to where he'd left his horse. Every few minutes he would stop to check on her, adjusting the coat to make sure she stayed warm. Her breathing seemed to be getting stronger, and some color was returning to her pale cheeks. "Stay with me, sweetheart," he murmured during one of these stops. "We've got a long way to go, but I promise you're not going to die on my watch." When Jack reached his horse, a sturdy mountain mustang named Thunder, he faced his first real challenge. How do you safely transport an infant on horseback over 20 miles of rough mountain trail? Jack had always been good with his hands, a skill that served him well both in the timber and around camp. Using leather strips from his saddlebags and extra clothing, he fashioned a makeshift sling that would hold the baby securely against his chest while leaving his hands free to handle the reins. "This might not be the smoothest ride you've ever had, little one," he told the baby as he secured the sling, "but it's the fastest way to get you to help." The descent from the high country was treacherous under the best of circumstances. The trail was narrow and rocky, with steep drop-offs that could kill a man and horse if they made one wrong step. With a baby strapped to his chest, Jack had to be even more careful, taking his time and trusting Thunder's sure feet to find safe footing. As they rode, Jack found himself talking to the infant, partly to keep her alert, partly to calm his own nerves. "My name's Jack Sullivan," he said, guiding Thunder around a particularly nasty switchback. "I'm from County Cork originally. Came to America when I was about your age. Course, I had my ma and da with me, not some stranger who found me under a pile of pine needles." The baby made soft sounds in response, and Jack took it as encouragement to keep talking. "I've been cutting timber for most of my life. Good honest work, though it's hard on a man's back and dangerous as hell. Sorry, sweetheart. Dangerous as anything. Lost more than a few friends to widowmakers and rigging accidents." As they descended toward the valley, Jack's mind wrestled with questions that had no easy answers. Who was this baby? Why had someone abandoned her in such a remote location? And what was he going to do with her once they reached Timber Falls? Jack had never married, never had children of his own. His life was the logging camps, rough places full of rough men who moved on when the timber played out. It wasn't the kind of life where a man could raise a child, especially not a baby girl who would need proper care and a woman's touch. But as he felt the small, warm weight of the infant against his chest and heard her soft breathing gradually becoming stronger and more regular, Jack found himself making promises he wasn't sure he could keep. "I don't know who you are or where you came from, little one," he said quietly. "But I'll tell you this much. Jack Sullivan doesn't abandon his responsibilities. We'll figure this out together, you and me." The sun was setting behind the mountains when the lights of Timber Falls finally came into view. The town wasn't much, a main street with a general store, saloon, hotel, and a few dozen houses clustered around a sawmill, but it represented civilization and help for the baby. Jack's first stop was Dr. Margaret Whitman's clinic. Doc Whitman was an unusual woman for the frontier, a trained physician from back east who had come west with her late husband and stayed after he died in a mining accident. She was skilled, practical, and one of the few people in Timber Falls whom Jack trusted completely. "Dr. Whitman." Jack called as he dismounted and carefully extracted the baby from the sling. "I need help." The clinic door opened immediately, and a woman in her 40s, with graying hair and intelligent eyes, emerged. Dr. Whitman took one look at the bundle in Jack's arms and ushered him inside. "What happened, Jack? Where did you find her?" "About 15 miles up Pine Creek Canyon, hidden under a pile of needles. She was barely breathing when I found her." Jack carefully unwrapped the baby and laid her on the examination table. "She's been getting stronger during the ride down, but—" Dr. Whitman was already examining the infant with practiced efficiency, checking her breathing, heart rate, and general condition. "How long do you think she was exposed?" "Hard to say. Could have been hours, could have been overnight." Jack watched anxiously as the doctor continued her examination. "Is she going to be all right?" "She's dehydrated and suffered some exposure, but overall she's in remarkably good condition. Someone was taking good care of her before she was abandoned." Dr. Whitman looked up at Jack. "This baby has been well fed and properly cared for. Her abandonment was recent. What kind of person abandons a healthy baby in the wilderness?" "Someone desperate, someone terrified, someone with no other choice, or someone who thought they had no other choice." Dr. Whitman began preparing a feeding bottle. "The question now is what to do with her." Jack had been dreading this conversation. "What are the options?" "Well, we could try to find her family, though that might be difficult given the circumstances. We could contact the territorial authorities about placing her with an orphanage. Or," Dr. Whitman paused, studying Jack's face, "or someone could take responsibility for her care." "Someone like who?" "Someone like the man who saved her life and carried her 20 miles down a mountain to get her help." Jack felt his heart skip. "Doc, I don't know anything about raising babies. I'm a lumberjack who lives in camps and moves around with the work." "Jack Sullivan, in the 3 years I've known you, I've seen you help injured men at considerable risk to yourself. Share your pay with families whose breadwinners were hurt, and show more natural kindness than half the so-called Christians in this town." Dr. Whitman's voice was firm. "If you want to care for this child, I think you do a fine job. But practically speaking, this baby needs someone who will love her and protect her. Everything else can be figured out." As if to emphasize the point, the baby began to fuss, and Jack instinctively reached for her. When he picked her up and held her against his shoulder, she immediately calmed, making small, contented sounds. "She knows you," Dr. Whitman observed with a smile. "That level of trust doesn't happen by accident." Jack looked down at the tiny face pressed against his shoulder, feeling something shift inside his chest. This little girl had no one else in the world, and he couldn't bear the thought of her disappearing into some distant orphanage where she'd be just another mouth to feed. "If I was to take her in," he said carefully, "what would that involve?" "Legally, you'd need to petition the territorial court for guardianship. Practically, you need to learn how to care for an infant and figure out living arrangements that would work for both of you. And if her real family shows up, then you deal with that when it happens. But Jack, someone hid this baby in the wilderness, hoping she'd die. Even if we found them, would you really want to return her to people capable of that?" The question hung in the air as Jack gently rocked the baby, who had fallen asleep in his arms. Through the clinic window, he could see the lights of the saloon where his fellow loggers were probably drinking away their pay. It was the life he'd known for years. Hard work, simple pleasures, no responsibilities beyond showing up and doing his job. But holding this tiny, helpless human being who trusted him completely, Jack realized that life no longer seemed like enough. "Doc," he said quietly, "if I take her in, I'm going to need help. I don't know the first thing about babies." Dr. Whitman smiled. "I think that can be arranged. There are several women in town who would be happy to help teach you. And Jack, yes, she's going to need a name." Jack looked down at the sleeping infant, thinking about where he'd found her and the circumstances that had brought them together. "Hope," he said finally. "Her name is Hope. Hope Sullivan. Hope Sullivan." Jack's voice was firm with decision. "And I swear on my mother's grave, no harm will ever come to her while I draw a breath." As Dr. Whitman prepared a proper feeding and made arrangements for Hope's immediate care, Jack stepped outside into the cool mountain evening. The life he'd known was over, and a new one was beginning, one that would revolve around the tiny girl who had been abandoned to die, but had instead found someone who refused to let her go. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever sacrifices he'd have to make, Jack Sullivan had found his purpose. And for the first time in his adult life, he had a family to protect. The baby who had been buried beneath pine needles would never be alone again. 3 weeks had passed since Jack carried Hope down from the mountain, and the rough lumberjack's life had been turned completely upside down. His small cabin on the outskirts of Timber Falls, once a simple place to sleep between logging jobs, had been transformed into something resembling a nursery with the help of half the women in town. Martha Stevens, the preacher's wife, had donated baby clothes that her own children had outgrown. Sarah Mitchell from the general store had provided bottles, blankets, and more advice than Jack knew what to do with. Even Molly O'Brien, who ran the town's only boarding house, had taken it upon herself to teach Jack the finer points of diaper changing and baby feeding. "Now, Jack," Martha was saying on this particular morning as she demonstrated the proper way to burp a baby, "you need to be gentle but firm. Pat her back like this, and don't be afraid if she spits up a little." Jack watched with the intense concentration of a man learning to handle dynamite. Hope, now healthy and obviously thriving under all the attention, gurgled happily as Martha worked with her. "I feel like I'm going to break her," Jack admitted, his large hands hovering uncertainly near the baby. "Nonsense," Sarah Mitchell said briskly from where she was folding tiny shirts. "Babies are tougher than they look. Besides, you've been doing just fine for 3 weeks." "That's because I've had all of you helping me," Jack replied. "What happens when I have to do this on my own?" "You'll figure it out," Molly O'Brien said with the confidence of a woman who had raised 6 children of her own. "That's what parents do. They figure it out as they go." The word parent still felt strange to Jack. He'd gone from being a solitary bachelor to a father overnight, and the responsibility was both terrifying and oddly fulfilling. Hope depended on him completely, and that dependency had awakened something in Jack that he hadn't known existed. Dr. Whitman arrived for her daily check on Hope, carrying her medical bag and wearing the practical dress and boots that marked her as different from the other women in town. "How's our girl doing today?" she asked, gently taking Hope from Martha and beginning her examination. "She's eating well and sleeping through most of the night," Jack reported, "though she seems to have strong opinions about bath time. That's perfectly normal. She's gained almost a pound since you brought her in. That's excellent progress." Dr. Whitman listened to Hope's heart and lungs with her stethoscope. "Have you given any more thought to making the guardianship official?" Jack had been avoiding that conversation, partly because it made everything feel so permanent, and partly because he was afraid of what questions might be asked. "Do I really need to involve the law? I mean, nobody's come looking for her." "Jack, sooner or later someone's going to ask questions. It's better to have legal documentation that establishes your right to care for her." Dr. Whitman handed Hope back to him. "Judge Morrison will be coming through town next month for the circuit court. I could arrange for you to speak with him then." "What if he says no? What if he decides I'm not fit to raise a child?" Martha Stevens looked up from the baby clothes she was organizing. "Jack Sullivan, you've worked harder to learn how to care for this baby than most natural fathers work to care for their own children. Any judge with sense would see that. Besides," Sarah added, "half the town would testify on your behalf. You've become quite the celebrity, the bachelor lumberjack who saved an abandoned baby." Jack winced at the description. The story of Hope's rescue had spread throughout the territory, growing more dramatic with each telling. He'd even heard a version where he'd fought off wolves to save her, which was nonsense, but seemed to impress people. "I didn't save her for the fame," Jack said quietly, looking down at Hope, who was studying his face with those bright blue eyes. "I saved her because she needed saving. And that," Dr. Whitman said with approval, "is exactly why you're the right person to raise her." After the women left, Jack found himself alone with Hope for the first time in days. The silence felt profound after all the bustling activity and advice. He settled into the rocking chair that Molly O'Brien had insisted he needed and positioned Hope in his arms for her afternoon feeding. "Well, little one," he said softly as she took the bottle, "it's just you and me now. What do you think of all this fuss everyone's making over us?" Hope's only response was to grab his finger with her free hand and hold on tight. The simple gesture never failed to amaze Jack. The way she seemed to trust him completely, the way she quieted when he held her, the way she followed his voice when he moved around the room. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Jack carefully secured Hope in the wooden cradle that Tom Bradley had built for them and went to answer it. Sheriff Dan Walsh stood on the porch, his expression serious. Walsh was a good man, fair, honest, and well-respected in Timber Falls, but his presence at Jack's door couldn't mean anything good. "Afternoon, Jack. Mind if I come in? I need to talk to you about something." "Of course, Sheriff. Is there trouble?" Walsh removed his hat and entered the cabin, his eyes automatically finding Hope in her cradle. "She's getting big. Dr. Whitman says she's thriving. What's this about, Dan?" The sheriff was quiet for a moment, then said, "Jack, I've been getting inquiries. People asking questions about the baby you found." Jack felt his blood run cold. "What kind of people?" "Territorial Marshal's office, for one. They've had reports of a missing infant and want to know if there might be a connection." Walsh sat down heavily in one of Jack's chairs. "There's also been a private investigator asking around. Says he's working for a family back east." "Do you think they're connected to Hope?" "Could be. Or could be completely separate cases. But Jack, you need to understand. If someone comes forward with a legitimate claim to this baby, the law will be on their side." Jack looked over at Hope, who was sleeping peacefully in her cradle, completely unaware that her world might be about to change again, even if those people abandoned her to die. Even then, blood family has rights that the law recognizes, regardless of circumstances. "That's not right, Dan." "Maybe not, but it's the law." Walsh leaned forward. Jack, I'm telling you this because I consider you a friend and because I think you're doing a good thing here. But you need to be prepared for the possibility that this might not end the way you want it to. Jack was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this information. What do you think I should do? Get that guardianship paperwork filed as soon as possible. The longer you have legal custody, the stronger your position becomes. And Jack, document everything. Every feeding, every doctor's visit, every milestone. If it comes to a legal fight, you want to show that you've been a good father to this child. After Walsh left, Jack sat in his rocking chair and stared at Hope, who had woken up and was making the soft cooing sounds that meant she was content. The thought of losing her was almost unbearable. She'd become the center of his world in just 3 weeks, giving meaning and purpose to every day. But more than that, Jack realized he genuinely loved this tiny person who had been thrust into his life so unexpectedly. He loved the way she smiled when she saw his face, loved the way she settled when he sang Irish lullabies his mother had taught him, loved the simple fact that she existed and that he'd been the one to find her. Hope, he said softly, I don't know what's coming or who might try to take you away from me, but I promise you this, Jack Sullivan doesn't give up without a fight. As if she understood, Hope reached up toward his voice, her tiny fingers opening and closing. Jack offered her his finger, and she grasped it with surprising strength. That evening, Dr. Whitman stopped by to check on them both. She found Jack at his kitchen table, writing carefully in a leather-bound journal. What's that? She asked, settling Hope in her lap. Documentation. Sheriff Walsh suggested I keep records of everything. How much she eats, when she sleeps, how much she weighs, what new things she learns. Jack looked up from his writing. Doc, he thinks someone might try to take her away from me. I heard about the inquiries. How do you feel about that? Terrified, angry, ready to fight anyone who tries to hurt her again. Jack set down his pen. Is that wrong? Should I be hoping her real family finds her? Dr. Whitman was quiet for a moment, studying Hope, who was contentedly playing with her fingers. Jack, I've been a doctor for 15 years. I've seen children in all kinds of situations, loved, neglected, abused, cherished. This little girl is happier and healthier than many children who are raised by their birth parents. But that doesn't change the law. No, it doesn't. But it does change how people see the situation. Jack, you've become Hope's father in every way that matters. That has to count for something. I hope you're right. I know I'm right. And I'll tell you something else. This town won't let anyone take Hope away from you without a fight. You've got more support than you realize. As if to prove her point, there was another knock at the door. This time it was Tom Bradley, the carpenter who had built Hope's cradle. Evening, Jack. Document. Tom nodded to both of them. I wanted to let you know, me and some of the boys have been talking. If anyone comes around making trouble about the baby, they'll have to deal with all of us. Tom, I appreciate that, but... No buts, Jack. You're one of us, and Hope's one of us now too. Timber Falls takes care of its own. After Tom left, Jack returned to his writing, documenting Hope's evening feeding and the fact that she had started responding to her name. But his mind was on what Tom had said. Hope was one of them now, part of the community that had formed around her rescue and Jack's determination to care for her. Maybe that would be enough. Maybe a community's love and a man's fierce determination to protect what he'd found could overcome whatever legal challenges lay ahead. As Jack tucked Hope into her cradle for the night and sang her the Irish lullaby that always seemed to soothe her, he made himself a promise. Whatever came, whoever tried to take her away, he would fight for her with everything he had. She was his daughter now, in every way that mattered, and Jack Sullivan protected what was his. Sleep well, little one, he whispered as Hope's eyes drifted closed. Tomorrow we start getting ready for whatever comes next. The man arrived on the Tuesday morning stage, dressed in an expensive suit that immediately marked him as an outsider in the rough, frontier town of Timber Falls. He was middle-aged, with graying hair and the soft look of someone who'd never worked with his hands. But his eyes were sharp and calculating as he stepped down from the stagecoach and surveyed the town. Jack was at the general store buying supplies for Hope when Sarah Mitchell hurried over to him, her face tight with worry. "Jack, there's a man asking questions about you and the baby. He's got legal papers and says he represents Hope's real family." Jack felt his stomach drop, but he kept his voice steady. "Where is he now?" Sheriff Walsh took him to the jail to talk. Said he wanted to review the man's credentials before he'd tell him anything. Jack quickly paid for his purchases and headed for the sheriff's office, his mind racing. This was what he'd been dreading for weeks, the moment when someone would come to take Hope away from the only family she'd known. Inside the jail, Sheriff Walsh was seated behind his desk, while the stranger sat across from him, an open briefcase at his side. Both men looked up when Jack entered. "Jack, this is Mr. Theodore Blackwood from Chicago. He says he represents a family that's looking for a missing infant." Walsh's tone was carefully neutral, but Jack could see the tension in his shoulders. Blackwood stood and offered his hand, which Jack ignored. "Mr. Sullivan, I presume? I'm told you're the one who found the baby." "I found a baby abandoned in the wilderness, if that's what you mean." "Yes, well, I believe that baby belongs to my clients, Mr. and Mrs. Harrison Thornfield of Chicago. They've been searching for their grandchild for over 2 months." "Their grandchild?" Jack's voice was sharp. Where were these grandparents when someone left a baby to die under a pile of pine needles? Blackwood's expression remained professionally neutral. "The circumstances are complicated, Mr. Sullivan. The baby's mother is the Thornfield's daughter, Catherine. She's been troubled for some time. Mental instability runs in families, I'm afraid." "So they're saying their own daughter tried to kill her baby?" "I'm saying that Catherine Thornfield disappeared from her family's estate in Chicago 3 months ago, taking her infant daughter with her. The family has been searching for them ever since." Sheriff Walsh leaned forward. "Mr. Blackwood, do you have any proof that the baby Jack found is this missing child?" Blackwood reached into his briefcase and pulled out a photograph. "This is Catherine Thornfield with her daughter, taken just days before they disappeared." Jack's heart sank as he looked at the photograph. The woman was young and beautiful, with dark hair and the same bright blue eyes as Hope. And the baby in her arms could indeed be Hope. The age was right, the features similar enough to be compelling. "That doesn't prove anything," Jack said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Perhaps not definitively, but combined with the timing, the location where you found her, and the physical resemblance." Blackwood shrugged. "I think most reasonable people would agree the evidence is substantial." "What happened to the mother?" Walsh asked. "Catherine's body was found in a river about 50 miles south of here 3 weeks ago. It appears she took her own life after disposing of the child." Blackwood's tone was clinical, as if he were discussing livestock rather than human tragedy. Jack felt sick. The idea that Hope's mother had tried to kill her own baby and then committed suicide was almost too horrible to comprehend. But it would explain why someone had tried to hide Hope, where she might never be found. "The Thornfields are prepared to offer you substantial compensation for your care of the child," Blackwood continued. "They understand you formed an attachment, and they're grateful for what you've done. But they want their granddaughter back where she belongs." "Where she belongs is with someone who loves her and will protect her," Jack said firmly. "Mr. Sullivan, the Thornfields are wealthy, prominent members of Chicago society. They can provide for this child in ways you never could: education, social position, financial security. Can they provide love? Can they provide someone who will put her needs before everything else?" "They're her family." "I'm her family." Jack's voice rose, and both Walsh and Blackwood looked at him with surprise. "I'm the one who found her dying and brought her back to life. I'm the one who's fed her and cared for her and loved her for the past month. That makes me her family more than some blood connection to people who let their daughter get so desperate she tried to kill her own child." Blackwood's expression hardened slightly. "Mr. Sullivan, I understand your emotional attachment, but the law is quite clear on matters of custody. Blood relatives have priority, especially grandparents of means and social standing." Sheriff Walsh cleared his throat. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm going to need to verify your credentials and review any legal documents you have. This isn't something that's going to be resolved today." "Of course." I have a petition for custody from the Territorial Court in Helena, signed by Judge Hamilton. I also have financial statements proving the Thornfields' ability to provide for the child, and character references from several prominent Chicago citizens. And what about character references for the man who saved her life? Jack asked. What about proof that he can provide love and stability and a home where she'll be wanted for herself, not as some replacement for a dead daughter? Mr. Sullivan, I'm sure you're a decent man, but you're also an unmarried laborer with no fixed address and no prospects for providing the kind of advantages this child deserves. Jack felt the words like physical blows. Everything Blackwood said was true from a certain perspective. Jack was indeed a bachelor lumberjack with limited financial resources, but the man had no idea what hope meant to him, or what he'd been willing to sacrifice to care for her. Sheriff, Jack said quietly, I need to see Hope. I need to make sure she's all right. She's at Dr. Whitman's clinic, Walsh replied. Martha Stevens is watching her while you're here. Jack started for the door, then turned back to face Blackwood. Mr. Blackwood, I don't know what kind of people these Thornfields are, and I don't care how much money they have. But I'll tell you this. Hope is happy and healthy and loved exactly where she is. If you try to take her away from that, you'll have to go through me. Mr. Sullivan, threats won't change the legal reality. That wasn't a threat. That was a promise. Jack left the jail and walked quickly to Dr. Whitman's clinic, his mind churning with possibilities and plans. He couldn't fight the law directly, but maybe there were other ways to protect Hope. He found her in Dr. Whitman's office, playing contentedly in Martha Stevens' lap. When Hope saw Jack, her face lit up with the pure joy that never failed to melt his heart. There's my girl, Jack said softly, taking her from Martha. Hope immediately settled against his shoulder, making the happy sounds that meant she felt safe. Jack, Dr. Whitman said quietly, Martha told me about the man from Chicago. How bad is it? Bad. He's got legal papers and what looks like a solid case for custody. Jack held Hope closer, breathing in her sweet baby scent. They're saying she's the granddaughter of some wealthy family back east. And you believe them? The evidence is pretty convincing. Photo of the mother with a baby that looks like Hope. Timeline that matches up. Physical resemblance. Jack's voice was heavy with defeat. I always knew this day might come, but I hoped. You hoped what? I hoped that love would count for something. That the fact that I've been a good father to her would matter more than blood and money. Martha Stevens looked up from where she was folding baby blankets. Jack, it does matter. It matters to everyone in this town, and it should matter to any judge who has to make this decision. But will it matter enough? Dr. Whitman was quiet for a moment, then said, Jack, there's something you should know. I've been doing some research since Sheriff Walsh told me about the inquiries. Mental illness, particularly the kind that leads to infanticide, often has hereditary components. What are you saying? I'm saying that if this family has a history of mental instability, placing Hope with them might not be in her best interests. A good lawyer could argue that genetic predisposition combined with the trauma of what happened to her mother makes this placement potentially dangerous. Jack felt a flicker of hope. You think that would work? I think it's worth fighting for. Jack, you've been an exemplary father to this child. Any objective evaluation would show that she's thriving under your care. But I'm just a lumberjack. I don't have the education or resources to fight wealthy people with expensive lawyers. You have something better, Martha said firmly. You have love, and you have a community that supports you. That's more powerful than you think. As if she sensed the tension in the adults around her, Hope began to fuss. Jack automatically began the gentle rocking motion that always calmed her, and she immediately settled. She knows you, Dr. Whitman observed. Look how she responds to you. That's not something that can be faked or bought. A knock at the clinic door interrupted their conversation. Sheriff Walsh entered, looking grim. Jack, I need to talk to you. Mr. Blackwood is demanding immediate custody of the baby. He says he has the legal authority to take her today. Can he do that? Technically, yes. His papers look legitimate, and territorial law generally favors blood relatives in custody disputes. Jack felt panic rising in his chest. Dan, you can't let them take her. She doesn't know them. It would traumatize her to be separated from everyone she's ever known. I know that, and I'm trying to buy you some time. I told Blackwood that I need to verify his papers with the territorial court in Helena, and that any custody transfer needs to be supervised by local medical authority. Walsh looked at Dr. Whitman. Doc, how long do you think Hope would need to be weaned from her current caregiver to prevent psychological trauma? Dr. Whitman didn't hesitate. At least 2 weeks of gradual transition, with careful monitoring of her emotional and physical well-being. Abrupt separation from her primary caregiver could cause severe developmental trauma. 2 weeks, Walsh repeated. That gives us time to get Judge Morrison here for a proper hearing. Jack felt a surge of gratitude toward both the sheriff and the doctor. What do I need to do? Fight, Walsh said simply. Get yourself a lawyer. Gather witnesses who can testify to your character and your care of Hope. Show the court that you're not just some drifter who found a baby. Show them you're a father. Where am I going to find a lawyer out here? There's a young attorney in Helena, Samuel Morrison, the judge's nephew. He's honest, and he believes in justice over politics. Walsh handed Jack a piece of paper. I'll send a telegram today. As they talked, Hope had fallen asleep in Jack's arms, her small face peaceful and trusting. Looking down at her, Jack felt his resolve harden. These people from Chicago might have money and legal papers, but they didn't have what he had. They didn't love this particular child, didn't know her moods and preferences, didn't understand that she liked to be rocked a certain way, or that she slept better when someone sang to her. There's something else, Dr. Whitman said quietly. Jack, I want you to know that I'll testify on your behalf. I'll tell the court that Hope has thrived under your care in ways that would be difficult to replicate elsewhere. So will I, Martha added, and most of the women in town who've helped with her care. We've all seen what kind of father you've become. And every man who's worked with you will testify to your character. Walsh said, Jack, you're not as alone in this fight as you think you are. But even with all this support, Jack knew the odds were against him. Money and social position carried weight in courtrooms, especially when backed by legal precedent about blood relatives. Still, he had to try. Hope deserved someone who would fight for her. All right, Jack said finally. We fight, but I need to ask all of you something. If this goes badly, if they take her away from me, will you keep watching out for her? Will you make sure she knows that someone here loved her? Jack, Dr. Whitman said gently, let's focus on making sure that doesn't happen.